Good morning. Welcome to what should have been the fourth legislative coffee, but because of the vagaries of weather, it's the third. Sponsored by the Ottawa Chamber of Commerce and the Franklin County Farm Bureau Association and the American Legion Post number 60. And while I mentioned the Farm Bureau, I will also say that there are some refreshments back there sponsored by the Farm Bureau, and help yourself anytime you want to. Other thank yous that I might just give right now are to the City of Ottawa for providing our facility here and the coffee, and for Matt Simonson for filming, and he'll make sure that this is put on the Government Access channel for those of you who are in Ottawa. We have some prepared questions here, and also then there will be plenty of time for you to ask your questions. I would say that please use the microphone, as this is going to be broadcast live, and also on the Government Access channel. Only one question per person at a time, and please hold your applause to allow time for additional questions. You may ask a question, but we don't want lengthy statements. I know we are tempted to do that when we have a cause. And please turn your cell phones off. There always seems to be one that goes beep, beep, beep before it's over. So with that, why don't we get started here? If I think of something else. I have been fighting a cold and a cough, so if I give out on you, why, you'll kind of have an idea what happened to me. Warning. Who's going to start here? Kevin, are you going to start?
Can you start?
Kevin is a legislator from over in the Wellsville area, and you'll pardon my informality because I just tend to call people by their first name. Kevin Jones. So why don't you tell us what your observations have been briefly?
Well, I appreciate it, and appreciate everybody being here this morning. Again, a thank you to the sponsors, Ottawa Chamber, American Legion 60, and Farm Bureau for setting this thing up, and for you guys to take part of your windy day to come out today. It's been nice to have this last week break for a couple different reasons. First of all, and maybe the least of which, I waited until today to put a metal roof on. I've been getting all the structure ready, but waited until the windy day, and that kind of just happens. But secondly, I think it was important when we voted for our leadership. Leadership basically sets the calendar, and the calendar was set with a break in there for about a week and a couple days, and I don't think it's ever really been like that. We've always had like a couple days, but never a week. And I think it's important for our state when it comes to this time. There's just a lot going on, and a lot of ideas that are out there, ideas that have failed, and ideas that haven't even been considered yet. And so I like the break in that I've been on a couple of conference calls during this break over a multitude of different ideas and things that are happening right now. And so it's been good because we're not in Topeka, we're not spending a bunch of money necessarily, but at the same time we're considering the ideas and finding where people are at on them, because ultimately that's what matters is where each of the legislators are at on the particular issues to get those things passed. That being said, one of the questions I was asked by the paper the other day is, are we going to get a school funding formula, considering the Supreme Court ruling on the current case? Are we going to get a funding formula by the June deadline? And I do believe we will. It's something we've been working on in the House for the last, since we started this year. Even before that, there's been ideas presented last year, and so I do think we're going to get there. It's just a matter of hearing all the different ideas. Some of the ideas you could read about in the paper, but there's 20 different ideas, maybe even more than that. And I call them concepts because some of them are concepts. Sometimes some of them are actual funding formulas, just a little bit of tweak. from formulas that have been before. But anyway, that's kind of where we find ourselves on that, and I feel like we're going to get there. But that being said, I'll let Blaine go.
Thank you all for coming out this morning. Thanks to the Farm Bureau and the American Legion and all of you for being here this morning. We're at that time of the session called turnaround. That was last week. That's where all the bills in the House need to be out of the House unless they've been blessed, meaning they've been through an exempt committee, one of 4 committees in the House. And then the Senate bills have to be out of the Senate and headed our way. So this week off was good not only for legislators but for staff as well. They're able to catch up and get all of those bills properly routed to where they need to go. So when we go back, we'll start over again, if you will, in that the committees will start to meet again on both House and Senate, and they will be taking up the bills from the other House and holding hearings on those, and then working those bills, making amendments and passing them out or locking them down in committee, theoretically, and not letting them out. That's been tried with a couple of bills and hasn't quite worked out this session. We'll talk about some of those, I'm sure. So that will kind of be the next 3 weeks, and then we'll do this thing where we're on the floor again all day for a few days, that 4th week, and then we'll hit what's called first adjournment in the first week of April, where we'll be out for a month before we go back for the veto session. So there's a lot to do in the next month, and then in the veto session. You've still got a tax plan that's going to have to be formulated and passed by both houses, and likely with a veto-proof majority based on what we've seen. That's going to be necessary. You've got a budget for fiscal year 18 and 19 that still has to be created. And then you've got the fix for this, which is the Gannon decision that came down on Thursday, and that needs to be done before June 30th of this year. So there's still a lot to be done. We're starting to get into Smokey and the Bandit territory. We've got a long way to go and a short time to get there. So we're gonna have to really hit it hard when we get back. But I've been impressed with the first 6-7 weeks of this session in the House. We've done really good work. The committees have been very active. Chairman Campbell and Representative Jones is on this committee. The K-12 Budget Committee have been working very diligently all session long to try to come up with a school funding formula, and have so far vetted ideas from a wide variety of perspectives. And I think they're narrowing down, and hopefully we'll be sending out a product in this next month for us to look at and start to add our critiques and constructive criticism, and hopefully get something that will work through both houses. So look forward to your questions this morning.
Thank you, Blaine. And I would say that if you were wondering if you missed the 3rd coffee, I think I just flat out miscounted. It only seems like it's been a long winter.
They all blend together.
Whatever number this is it. Karen has made it, our state senator, through the metropolitan traffic, so have at it.
Well, good morning, everybody. Those of you that live on a farm or a ranch may understand the cattle don't always work on my schedule. So it's been an early morning. We've been out of bed all night. But it's been an interesting session so far. We have worked diligently. In fact, the Senate, we're doing 2-a-days. I don't know how many of you played sports, but I did 2-a-days in college. Well, we're doing 2-a-days in the Senate Tax Committee. We're trying to figure this thing out. It's not an easy process at this point. You know, I've said this before, but we have legislators that are voting to a soundbite, not to sound policy, and that's part of the problem. This tax bill that was passed by a majority of legislators, but there were several issues with that tax bill. Are you guys talking about the tax bill already? Or?
Oh, they're talking about everything.
I'll go right into it, because that tax bill, it was just a bad bill. There were so many things that were not good with it. One of the main things was that it started retroactively. Every person in this room that pays income tax, your income tax would have gone up January 1st, 2017. That may not seem like much, but
it plays hob with your estimates that you
there you go. That's exactly correct. Especially when it wouldn't be implemented for 2 to 4 months from now. The other issue is that it didn't promote fairness within our tax code. That is something that we need to address. Also, the main thing that I would say is that it was a major tax increase on people that are trying to make ends meet. And that's not where we need to go with our tax code. People that are struggling check to check That would have been a major tax increase to them. So the question is, where do we go from here? The Senate has been working on several bills. We've passed out a couple of them out of committee. One of them was very similar to that bill that passed. It actually had higher numbers than this bill, but it wasn't retroactive for personal. The other bills we're working on, we actually have 4 tax bills right now that we're trying to get a combination of to find out what the best solutions are. One of the items that the Senate is working for is the regents, your professors, and people at your colleges and universities. They don't pay income tax going in on their retirement, and they don't pay income tax coming out on their retirement. Most capers pay going in. So that's something we need to address in the tax code and make sure we get it fixed. It's about fairness. And those have been in the Senate tax bills that we've worked on, and we'll continue to fight for that type of policy.
Okay, do either one of you fellows have anything to add to what she has said now? Or shall we start asking for questions already?
Questions?
Kevin? Well, I have a half a dozen questions here that have been prepared by members of the committee. We're halfway through the current legislative session, and the legislature has passed a tax solution which was vetoed by the governor. The veto was overridden by the House, but sustained by the Senate. What are your views on the bill which was passed and eventually vetoed? Is the solution somewhere within? And please expand on the possibility or the realities of a 2017 tax plan and your personal views. Now, have you pretty well said all that you have to say about this? Or what do you think about the governor vetoing it?
Well, there were some legislators that voted just because the governor was against it, and that's not a good way to decide whether you're going to vote for or against legislation. We did not have a budget. We do not have a budget before us, and we do not have a school funding. But we do have good music in the background that we can...
Does ignore? I hope it does.
Without having a budget or a school formula, we don't know what kind of fiscal impact we need to have with the tax code. For the last 2 months, revenues have increased. So what number do we actually need? I went back and looked at the history on this since I've been in session, and I confirmed major tax code, especially income tax code, is not usually passed until May or June. And that includes the 2012 tax bill. It did not pass the legislature until May. So we want to do our due diligence and make sure that we get a good policy and work towards a positive, strong structure so that we're not back here in the next year or two.
Loaded question, and got in there the personal views, and I'll try and give you some of the personal views on it. This is, I think, is extraordinary when you consider that the House passed the bill and the Senate passed it. It goes to the governor, he vetoes it. It comes back to the House. We override the veto, it goes to the Senate, and by 3 votes, it doesn't pass. First of all, it goes to show how hard just any legislation is to even pass. But secondly, it's a good example of balancing powers. And with that, I'm personally, I think it's interesting that on the opinion of the courts, that we bend and move and do exactly what they say, but the executive branch, that when he makes a decision, or she, whoever's in that position, makes a decision, how just easily we can veto or override a veto. Although, I should say, there's a lot of votes there with on both sides, and so it was very, very close. That being said, I do think that the ultimate version will be almost like that. I also agree with the senator. I think what I struggled with this whole thing, beside the retroactivity, is just how easily we jumped in to raise taxes without even really, we don't have the 1819 or anything like that. Now, we know possibly what we need, but we don't know what we need for the school funding formula. If we go with the second funding formula that was put out there, it's going to need a lot more money than that. And so, although that one, yeah, we could get into that. I think it plays the rural versus the urban a little bit too much. But that being said, we don't even know, and so we're going to raise taxes. We would have had to raise them again, I think, at that point. So there's some personal views in there, but also I just think that it gives us a good idea of where everybody's at. We know where the Senate's at, we know where the House is at, and we know where the governor's at least an idea of where everybody's at. And that's ultimately, as Representative Finch was saying, that's what we need, what's going to pass when it comes to our tax increase or to our revenue. So,
Well, I'll give you my perspective on it. I voted against the tax bill initially. There were things about it that I didn't like, and specifically, what I didn't like about it was retroactivity is a bit of a red herring. Every income tax bill the legislature's passed in the last decade or better has been retroactive. They go back to January 1 because it's hard for accountants and taxpayers to break in the middle of a tax year and say, now our rate is X before it was Y. And was the income gathered before that date or after that date? And so most income tax bills feature a full calendar year, a full tax year, because that's the accounting norm. And this bill would have been retroactive by about 45 days. So it's not like people had to reach back into prior tax years and amend filings. It would have affected estimates for those who estimate their taxes and pay quarterly by 1 quarter. My problem with the bill was more about what it did to the middle class in Kansas, and they have taken it on the chin since the 2012 tax bill. We've seen increases in their grocery store bill for taxes. We've seen increases in everything that they buy that is a good. We've seen taxes go up on nursing home care when they have to put their parents in a nursing home. We've seen taxes go up on health care for those folks. And we've seen deductions like mortgage interest and medical being reduced or eliminated. And this bill brought medical back, which was a step in the right direction, but it also then raised by the greatest percentage the income tax rate on the middle class. It went from, I think, 4.6 up to 5.25 in this one. And then set the top bracket for those making over $100,000 at just 0.2% higher at 5.45. Now, those are still a full percentage point below the tax rates in 2011. So it was still, depending on whether you look at a year or whether you look at a 5-year slice, it's still a tax cut based on what people paid in 2011, and it would have been more than what they paid in the year before. I felt like we could do better. And when you're in a legislature, when you're in a democracy, the majority rules. The majority thought we did just fine. And the majority thought we did fine in the House, and the majority thought we did fine in the Senate, and that was the bill that passed and went to the governor's desk. The Senate president told the governor, if you're going to veto this, send us back a structural fix. Give us something that we can actually say this will work, the governor will support it, and both houses can pass it, and we can go forward. And he didn't. With less than a day's consideration, the governor vetoed the bill and gave us no other alternative. Well, my day job, is to negotiate. I'm a lawyer. That's what we do. We litigate and we negotiate. And if you're not willing to take a strong stand in a negotiation, you're going to get run over every time. And that's exactly what happened on the veto override. The House took a strong stand and the Senate folded. We had an opportunity where we could have come back with a trailer bill and we could have fixed retroactivity. We could have changed that and made it effective March 1st, or we could have made that effective at the end of the first quarter. And I understand that leadership in both chambers had talked about doing something like that. And so it wasn't a viable option, and it was one that was on the table. I didn't like the bill, but I sure don't like the fact that we're sitting here without a tax plan, without a budget, without a school funding formula, and we've got a lot of people who've put in a lot of work to this point, and it feels like we're treading water on those big issues. And the reason that most of those get done in April and May in the middle of the night is because of a lot of things that you all, when you vote, say you don't like. You don't like us sitting there at 3 in the morning. You don't like us passing bills we haven't read. You want us to do our business when we start in Topeka, and that's what this speaker has tried to do. He's got people working right off the bat. And it probably was to our detriment that the tax bill that ultimately garnered a majority in both chambers came out in February. Because as the senator said, if it's not in the middle of the night in May when everybody wants to go home, it's hard to get people to vote for it. So, we'll go back to the drawing board. I think the representative is right. I think what you're going to see probably mirrors this pretty closely. Senator Denning, the majority leader in the Senate, has put out in his newsletter that if retroactivity were out of it, his plan looks a lot like this. And so, you know, there are some tweaks that could be made. There were some tweaks that could have been made after a veto override if we wanted to get there. So I'm not for oppressive taxation. I'm not one who likes to raise people's taxes. I don't think we should be unreasonable in our tax policy. If I were drafting my perfect tax policy, it might go in a different direction. But the reality is we live in a democracy, we live in a republic where the majority rules, and when the majority spoke and passed a serious plan, it was time for people to come around the table in a serious way, and I don't feel like the governor did that, and I think the veto was justified because of that.
Thank you, Blaine.
Veto override, pardon, was justified.
Any more comments on that? Because I've got another question here on taxes. This is from the committee. The mill levy for education has been frozen at 20 mills for a long period of time. Each additional mill yields about $32 million. What are your views on tapping additional property tax for school finance or for additional state shortfalls in revenue? And I would add, as a trailer to that question, my appraisals came yesterday, so that probably gives you an idea of where, and probably somebody else in the audience got appraisal sheets from the county too. Okay, Senator, what do you think about the 20 mills?
Property tax. The state does not use property tax. They require a 20 mil for the schools, and then they keep a small percentage of that for bookkeeping, but the state does not use property tax for the state general fund. So the portion of the question that asked, would you use property tax to get us out of this? Absolutely not. I would not go there. Property tax is used for schools and local government. There has been talk, there's been some county commissioners that have requested that I look into a 35 mil for the schools instead of 20, removing the LOB. That's a big change. We need to have committee hearings, we need to have items discussed before that amendment goes on a bill. As far as legislation passing in the middle of the night, none of us like that. One of the items we had 17 bills above the line one day, and the majority leader in the Senate stood up and said he was going to put 6 more bills above the line. You would have 2 hours to read those bills and to vote on them and to make amendments for them. Well, I stood up and said that we needed to be more diligent with our process and more thoughtful when we're working on these bills. Leadership was upset at me, said I was throwing them under the bus for stating publicly that we should do the work before us and have the bills listed in advance. I just think that's part of it, and I think that I commend the House a couple years ago. They tried to pass a bill, or actually they did pass a rule where they don't work past midnight. The problem is they keep suspending that rule and working past midnight when we get to critical issues. So I'm hopeful this year that they don't suspend that rule and that we have the numbers before us on a tax bill, that we are able to look at what's needed, not what's wanted. We need to look at our wants versus our needs.
Thank you. Now that you've cleaned up the question here as to what the 20 mills was for, you fellas, Blaine, you want to?
The 20 mills goes into the state. The state collects those 20 mills, and then they divide out according to a formula and pay back to those districts who don't have a lot of property wealth. They give additional money, and for those who do have a lot of property wealth, they end up paying in and not getting anything back, and that forms kind of general state aid to school districts. So the state does act like a middleman. It pays it all back out, but it is included in the state's calculation for base aid per pupil. So the state does claim credit for it when it comes to school finance litigation, and even though they are passing it back out to school districts based on their wealth and students and weighting and according to whatever the formula is at the time. I have not seen a serious discussion yet about raising that 20 mills. When I first worked in Topeka as an intern about 20 years ago, it was at 32 or 35 mills.
Thank you, Blaine. I was just about to ask you about that.
And it was reduced through the Graves years. You might recall the federal government had surpluses in the late 90s, and the state was doing very well. And every year it was a fun time to be in the legislature because it was a question of how much we're going to cut taxes. And eventually that mill levy got down to 20. and that's where it stands today. So I've not seen a serious proposal this year to raise it in order to deal with the Gannon decision, but we still don't have a dollar figure, and that's something we can get into when we unpack the Gannon decision a little later. So as we get into that discussion of a dollar figure, someone may bring that to the fore, but Kansas right now, we had a balanced system, income, sales, and property taxes to support multiple levels of government. And property taxes in Kansas, if you look at it on a nationwide basis, I think we're 37th. And that's not on the good side of 37th. We're not low. We're higher than average on property taxes. And you've pointed out, Almeida, the issue with farm ground and commodity prices, which have gone in the tank. And unfortunately, because of the rolling average, we've got farmers now seeing increases in their property tax bill, even though their commodity prices are down due to a problem with that formula. So I don't think that's the answer. And I've not heard a lot of people talk seriously about it. So that's the short answer is I don't think that's going to be the way we try to address Gannon.
Would you make the observation that our three-legged stool is really way out of whack?
I would argue that in 2012, somebody took a hacksaw to one of those legs.
Okay. Yes, Kevin.
And I just had to add 32 million, and this is a question. The 32 million, is that for Ottawa area, or is where that, because each mill goes for so much, and I didn't know that it was actually 32 million. Is that
Statewide.
statewide? Okay.
Stage. I mean, the total.
The only reason I ask that is because this gets into the equity portion of things, and you start messing with it. And again, like I said before, it becomes a rural versus urban, because in the urban areas, your mills can raise so much more. And if you and when you start giving freedom, then you have school districts and places that they can they can gather so much more money quickly, rather than out in the rural areas, which is mainly what I have, where we kind of get the short end of the stick, if you will. So.
Blaine, Karen is down here asking me about this 32 million. Is that an accurate figure?
It doesn't sound accurate to me. It sounds low.
Okay, well, we'll just pass on over that. My tech man back there, Richard Jackson, is going to run around and hang on to the mic, and let's take a question or two. Yes, sir. Got one right up here. And it's no long statements and one question.
And no cell phones, right?
I'm sorry. I
Yes, I'm Darrell McCune from Ottawa. Public education and the well-being of our most vulnerable citizens, our school-aged children, have been under attack by the governor and many in the legislature in recent years. Now the governor wants to try to do school grading systems, merit pay, untrained teachers in rural schools, and more money to unaccountable private schools. The House passed House Bill 2186 that reinstates due process rights for teachers, and I was wondering if Senator Tyson will support that bill when it comes to the Senate for a vote. And I'm sure that Representative Finch and Representative Jones had good reasons for voting against it, which they would like to explain to us.
I'll go.
jump on it.
This was, it was put on to 2186 as an amendment, so, but that is the main crux of it. Essentially, the amendment that, as amended, House Bill 2186, takes what was done before when it comes to teacher tenure and gives it takes it back to the state level rather than having it at the at the local school board level. And I've said before, I mean, being on the local school board, KSB, local school boards, I appreciate actually having that responsibility on my shoulders as an elected school board member. In fact, everybody on my board, it doesn't matter whether you're liberal, conservative, or any, we appreciate having that and would rather have that on our shoulders rather than having it at the state level. So in my eyes, I mean, essentially it's a mandate from the state level. It would be me at a state level saying that the local school board, we're going to take this off your shoulders, we're going to say this is how it is. And so the local school board, I believe, is where that should be at, and that's where it's at. But so far, yeah, it's pretty early on that particular amendment. So,
Blaine?
The underlying bill, which didn't get a lot of publicity, was one that came out of Judiciary Committee, and one I actually liked. It was it was the update to the Uniform Arbitration Act, which hasn't been updated since 1955. Now, most people in this room say, big deal, we've gone that long, we'll be okay, but it was part of the nuts and bolts work that the Judiciary Committee does. So whether the Senate takes it up or not, I don't know, but we may have lost that underlying vehicle depending on how they receive the due process piece. My problem with the due process piece is that when that amendment was offered on that bill, we had a pending motion of a previous day, which would have been voted on the next day, to pull up the issue of due process from the Education Committee and debate it on the floor. And procedurally, I didn't like the fact that folks were attempting to have it both ways by making the motion of a previous day to pull up the bill clean, which I think it deserved a clean debate, and instead amended it on this arbitration bill. The other piece that I didn't like is that it was simply a return to the prior statutes. And the prior statutes did have some warts, and it did have some cleanup that needed to be done to it, and this didn't do that. I'm not on the Education Committee, and I understand there was some consternation with the chairman for the way he scheduled meetings towards the end of saying he was going to work a bill and then not working a bill, and some of that. And I'll decline to insert myself into that side of the issue, but I wish that the committee would have debated the bill internally and had a discussion about fixing some of those things. For instance, my understanding is it relies on the naming of 5 hearing officers, and there's only 5 hearing officers in the state, and not many more. It's essentially a monopoly on those who get to be involved in the process of these hearings. And we had a former school district attorney who's now in the legislature who came and talked in the well about some of the issues they had and his desire to see a bill that protected teachers from being terminated or having adverse employment action because of this was the school board member's son, or this was the superintendent's daughter in their class, or this was a star athlete. We certainly don't want that kind of interference in teachers and the work they do, but while balancing and fixing some of the problems that were in the old system, and we just didn't get that. So it came to us all or nothing on this bill while the motion was still pending for the next day, and to me that was enough that I said I can't support it in this fashion, in this way, and would have liked to have had a more reasoned look at it.
Karen, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I haven't seen the bill yet. I'll read it when it comes through the Senate.
Maybe one more question on education, and then we'll get into something fun like Medicaid or something. Is there another burning well, we'll come back to it. I don't see any hands up. What about expansion of Medicaid is something which could be vitally important to our rural Franklin County community health care providers, potentially have a very positive financial effect for organizations like the hospital, COF, and Elizabeth Layton Center. The Kansas House has voted to expand CanCare. What are your expectations of some form of Medicaid expansion bill making it to the governor this year? Oh, Karen, you want to start with that?
Sure. It was a House bill. I haven't seen the bill yet or the details. I've always said that we need to have the CanCare discussion, that we need a Kansas solution. We can't afford, especially now, we can't afford to accept it, just a blanket CanCare, yes, the way Obamacare has it stated. So if we'd have the discussion and look at a Kansas solution, I think that's something that we can do. I've heard 2 different fiscal notes, anywhere from 50 to 100 million for the note that passed the House. And another issue that we have before us is a new president. We're not sure what they're going to do with that program. We know that it was 100% match. Now it's 90-10, and it goes down as the years progress. Yes. So we need to make sure that we have a viable solution that we can support.
Evan?
I voted no when it came to the expansion bill. I felt like it went really quick also, but besides the money and how much it costs, because, excuse me, over 10 years, we're not talking millions, we're talking billions. It's a lot of money. The states that have all done it and we had different people representing different states that have done the expansion recently, and there's goods and bads. The economic, a lot of people talk about, well, when you have all these, you're going to create new jobs and all this stuff. Yes, there has been good economic jobs created and the like, but the actual money to the state is extraordinary. Besides that, and for me, it comes down to timing, really. When at the federal level, Representative Yoder was actually at the House when we were debating this, and he was telling us the different things that they're actually doing at the federal level to try and fix. And like one of the things for the states that did expand, bought in, then there's. I'm trying to think of the actual terms. There's the dish payments that hospitals were getting. Those that expanded don't get those dish payments back. Those who haven't, they will begin to get those dish payments back. Things like that, where I do understand about our rural hospitals and how important that is, especially for Garnett and those, even if they do come over an umbrella or a bigger entity. But that being said, that timing plays a big role, and we kind of just are moving it forward rather quickly. So anyway.
Well, I would have much rather had this debate on the bill that we had last year, which was more like the Indiana model. It used a waiver to expand Medicaid, but required all people who were in that expanded group, so between 100 and I think 133% of federal poverty level, to pay something in the form of deductibles and copays. This bill was straight Medicaid expansion. If you were in that gap, you were in that area, the state was going to provide your health care at no cost to you. The fiscal note, as near as we know, is $50 million for the upcoming fiscal year for 18. And that is currently, I think we're at 95.5 or 96.4 in terms of who pays what. And it will by 2020 go to 90.10. So by 2020, the impact on the state budget would have been over $100 million. And if the federal government ever does away with the match on expansion, it would go to what's called FMAP, which is a different part of the Medicaid reimbursement, and the fiscal impact to the state would be about $450 million a year for that expanded population. So I voted no on it because it was not the waiver system that had everybody paying something, which I think is a superior alternative and it's a better way to expand. I also voted no because you had HSBC folks, HCBS, home and community-based service folks. Those are, think about COF, the IDD community, who are on waiting lists, who don't receive services right now. Expanding Medicaid puts able-bodied folks ahead of them in line for health care paid for by the government. I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think we should tell some people to wait while folks who can work, and remember, the expansion population is only non-disabled adults whose incomes are in that range. I don't think we jump them to the head of the line while other people who need it have to wait. I didn't think that was appropriate. I didn't think, given the state's fiscal situation, it was appropriate to add $50 million in new spending when we were in the middle. It happened the same day, ironically enough, as the veto override on the tax debate. So it was brought into clear relief for me that on the one hand we don't have enough money to pay our existing obligations, and on the other we're going to increase spending by at least $50 million a year. I didn't think that was appropriate. So there are a number of reasons, and the uncertainty in Washington is also a reason, to say let's figure out what we're going to do. The expansion, I called on the governor to look at expansion 3 years ago when it was 100% reimbursement, and I wish he had done that. He didn't do that, but I think it would have been a mistake for us to expand right now with the fiscal situation we're in, and to do it this way without the Indiana model is the one that's most commonly cited, and to put those folks who are able-bodied, non-disabled, above those who are disabled and need that service more critically.
I might just throw out a question here that is a little more on a national level in one respect, but with all the discussions on the Affordable Care Act, what are you talking about at Topeka on how that's going to affect Kansas, whatever they may be trying to do? Or can you see down the road far enough to even know what it might do?
From what I read last night, even the legislators aren't getting told. The bill is locked up and people don't have access to the bill, so it's hard to comment on that, and it's really discouraging. We need that bill in public and vetted before we pass anything at the federal or state level.
I think the issue, and it's one that the Senator and I have agreed on several times about the effect of CanCare in the state, and what really I think has not been ideal and has not been a positive system for our residents in the state. The ultimate goal, as you hear the new administration talk about, is to block grant Medicaid funds to the state and say, here you go, you can do with this what you want. And CanCare was kind of the first of its kind, an attempt to privatize Medicaid and use these MCOs, and we've seen how that's been going. So I think if the goal is to block grant it, you could expect more of the same under the current administration in Kansas, and I don't know how that would be any better than what we've had so far, which has really been pretty abysmal in terms of response rates, and we've got providers that are talking about pulling out here, the MCOs, and that it's not a system that's working for them. Surprise, surprise, they can't get profit out of a system that wasn't built for profit. So, you know, I don't know yet how block granting it is going to make it any better here. I think we really need to dig into the CanCare system, and some talk about moving the Inspector General for CanCare over to the Attorney General's office, I think, is a positive step. It will help some, but really that job's to root out fraud. It's not really about patient advocacy. I think we need to beef up the Ombudsman's office and help people get the relief they need, and I think it needs some real tweaks here locally. So I'm not sold on CanCare, not sold we're going to get something better if we're just going to get block granted more money into CanCare.
Do we see some more questions out here? Here, we got one right up here, Richard.
Hi, Darren Underwood. What is your stance on Chris Kobach and Donald Trump's unsubstantiated claims that there's widespread voter fraud? And ancillary to that, what is how do you feel about, I'm having a brain fart, the fact that voter ID laws actually lead to voter suppression?
I can go first. First, I think that our election system is the best in the world in the United States. We have our county election officer here today in the audience, and I think that she and the other usually county clerks around the state who handle that duty do a great job. I was skeptical. Round of applause. I am very skeptical about the Secretary's claims about voter fraud, not only in the state. I won't speak nationally because I don't know what issues there might be in other states, but I think there were 11 cases. I was on the Judiciary Committee when he came to us and asked the ability to prosecute people for election crimes, and he said at the time, I think he had 9 cases. I think there may be 11 now, and then maybe 6 prosecutions, and you know, should someone vote in 2 places? Absolutely not. And it is illegal, and it's illegal for a reason. Is it influencing elections in the state of Kansas? Is it switching, you know, one candidate to another? I don't think we've seen any evidence of that. Is it widespread enough that we need to spend the amount of resources that we're spending on it? I think that's a policy question, and for me, I can't make out the case that, given the tight fiscal times, we need to be focused on that to the exclusion of some other things that need to be done at the state level.
Kevin?
My feelings on it. I mean, I vote legally, and I would hope that everybody who votes legally. Being an elected official, I've seen some races just north and west of us that were really close races, really close, to where even 11, 10 people could have switched a race. Don't know if that happened or not. I don't know if that was even, that particular area was even looked at, but, and some folks down towards Wichita area, same thing. I mean, it was the difference was so slim. So if I was ever in a race that was that close, that would probably be in my mind, and I think it is when they go back and they look at those races, or they appeal and have them recounted and stuff like that. I think that's what they're trying to do, is actually be able to weed it out and whatnot. But when it comes, I want them all to be. I also agree. I think that our elections are probably the best, but I don't think that it's bad to actually make sure that there isn't voter fraud. I mean, I struggle with the idea of stealing from the cookie jar not being as bad. And being on judiciary, you could tell me if I'm wrong, but one thing that you do illegal not as bad as another thing you do illegal. It's still illegal, and that's what I struggle with that. And so in this case, when it comes to, it's possible that with a certain budget, we shouldn't be focusing on voter fraud. we should be focusing on something that is more important, but at the same time, there's still things that are illegal. And so, depends. I'm not in that situation where I actually have that budget to actually focus on voter ID, but.
Anything to add to that, Karen?
Well, voter ID, I totally agree with. At first, I was hesitant on it for reasons. I have a family member who's never driven, never worked outside the home, did not have any ID. It would have been a hardship for her to get ID. They made arrangements through rules and regs for people to be able to do that. And we use an ID to get on an airplane. For those of you that are old school and still write checks, not very many in this room probably, but yeah, myself included. We have to have an ID now to go to the doctor's office. The largest form of identity theft now is electronic medical records. So you're showing an ID to go to your doctor's office even. Why wouldn't we show an ID to vote? It just makes sense. When it is so critical, we want an accurate system. We want to trust. We have such faith in our elections, and we don't want to lose that faith.
Thank you. I want to take just a moment. I usually, on the mornings that the Ottawa Herald comes, because my mail comes late, I look at the headlines, at least, on my computer as far as they pertain to the Ottawa Herald. And this morning I was pleased to see that there was a lengthy article in the Ottawa Herald, and Janet Brewers is here, and I'm not sure who all else, involved with bread in a bag, the teaching that we do with our young people in the school about where their food comes from, where their flour, or where their wheat goes, and the milling, and all of the process in between making a loaf of bread. Janet, do you want to stand up? Are you able to stand up?
I am able.
Anyway, I thank the Herald for putting in such a nice article, and I certainly thank my fellow Farm Bureau ladies who have done this so long.
May I add to that really quickly?
You want to add something to that?
I want to add something. I want to thank the Williamsburg School District also. I go around and tour my schools in the district, especially when I'm invited. And Williamsburg, if you haven't had an opportunity to go see what they're doing out there, it is wonderful. They are starting from seed to mouth. They grow the wheat, they bring it in, they harvest it, they make pretzels, they have animals, farm animals, collect the eggs, they actually butcher. It's amazing. So they're experiencing, and their education is based around agriculture, and the kids are excited about it. They enjoy going to school. They're just so enthused to be there. It's an amazing program, and I brag on it every chance I get in Topeka.
Well, I just wanted to commend this group of ladies from the Farm Bureau who go around. They've only missed one school this year, and that's because it doesn't have an oven. But aside from that,
What school would that be?
Eugene,
We made ice cream.
yes, you're making ice cream, but is that Eugene Field that didn't have an oven? Yes. And it's a wonderful learning process, and it smells good, too. I also want to say we have a guest with us this morning, Charlie Sargent. Charlie, would you stand up? Charlie is our district administrator for Farm Bureau, and he came to see what this is all about, I guess. So it's nice to have you here, Charlie. Okay, who wants to have another question now? Got one right there.
Yes, my name is John Holland, and I was just wanting to find out just how far does the governor and the legislature want to go with guiding the state university systems. Basically, you've got adjuncts being dumped, you've got professors that are working 4 or 5 classes at 20 to 25 students each per semester, and you're basically having to hire people from far outside the state, even from the country, who will accept the low wages that the universities are willing to pay the incoming professors. And so my question is just how far are you willing to go in guiding the state university system? Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to take that?
I can begin. with just being the chair of the Higher Education Budget Committee this year. We looked at the 17 budget. We could have cut all of the regents, all of the colleges did not put that forward. It did pass the governor, basically the governor's plan, which, as I said before, it's like kicking it down the road. But looking at the 18-19, we're getting ready to work those bills. There hasn't been any cuts even, well, I can't say it hasn't been floated. There's been ideas floated that didn't pass out of committee. So our recommendation to the propes was all of the colleges got what they basically asked for. When we have that discussion, it'll be early this next week, we have that discussion for the 18-19 budget, then we'll know where the colleges stand at that point.
Blaine?
I think the Senator wanted to speak first.
go ahead.
I'm not on any of the education budget committees, whether it's higher ed or whether it's appropriation, so I haven't yet seen the budget for this year and what they'll do. I think we have some of the finest Regents institutions in the country in Kansas, and I'm committed to keeping them that way. And that's all I can say, absent some information or some bill on Regents institutions and that funding for fiscal year 18 and 19.
Senator?
Sure. The regents were cut a couple of years, but it's interesting, if you go out and look, majority of the regents are building and have new programs going on. So one of the things that happens with the regents is they do have a block grant. That money is just given to the regents from the state, and then the administration decides where that money's spent. So that could be part of the issue that you're asking about. The other item with the regents is, it's come up a couple of times, and I hope Farm Bureau will pick this up, but our K-State Veterinary School, a majority of the students are from out of state. In fact, it's very difficult for Kansas students to get admission to the Kansas Veterinary School program. And what that's doing is starting to create a shortage of vets, especially large animal vets in Kansas. So it's something that we need to start forward thinking and addressing this issue before it becomes extremely difficult for rural Kansans to have access to a veterinary.
What is the reason for that?
Because the out-of-state students are paying out-of-state tuition, and so that they pay a higher rate. I'm just guessing. I don't know that that's the reason, but
I might add on also, and this maybe goes, as they were speaking, goes back to your question, because, yeah, the regents haven't cut in prior years, without a doubt. Yeah, and what has happened, and you're exactly right. Like on the 2017 revision, normally the governor will make those allotments. He make those cuts himself. That's why I've said before I would never want to be governor, because that's his job. Is if it comes to him and it doesn't fit, then he's got to do the cuts. Normally he does that. This year he sends it back to us. We went through, every college president came and presented before our committee, committed for the 2017. That's why our committee made the recommendation, given what they asked for. It went back out, and that's what's passed. But for 18 but anything, having heard from each of the presidents now twice on some of them, one of the actual things I thought was fascinating, besides the Wichita State, Pittsburgh State are some of the ones that are really on the forefront of actually doing the private, doing a collab with private and government to actually create the environments for almost like learning. Like for instance, on Wichita State, Starbucks has come in and I mean one of the biggest drive-throughs that you'll find in the nation, and they're on what used to be their golf course, and they're set up now. Not only can a student get a job, but they can also be be mentored through like management and things like that. As part of classes. It's amazing what they're doing. But that being said, Fort Hays State University was talking to us, and what they've found, because they've kept their tuition costs low in spite of all of the things that have gone on through the state government and everything that's happened. They've been very smart in how they've actually kept their tuition low. But one of the things that is changing that, though, is the demand for career paths or for jobs. The demands are changing. They're changing from what used to be, and I would say, man, I don't even know what the other ones are, but they're changing to like nursing and engineering and higher level things that take more money. And so when they're creating that shift, you might even have less students, but they're paying a lot more, and so the colleges are having to work around, so they're losing some of the lower paying areas that normally they would have, and they're shifting all of their focus toward more higher paying positions. And so we've seen that across a couple different colleges where it's actually shifting. So that could answer your question a little bit, but I don't know that's all.
I'm just going to say we got about 5 minutes left here, 4 to 5 minutes. So don't stand out in the lobby afterwards and say, oh, gee, I wish I'd have asked that question.
Yeah, my name is Roxanne Mettenberg. I live at Princeton, and I do have a question. All of you made, Verlaine, you particularly made a compelling argument on the budget. Can we go back to the budget?
Sure, anything you want to go back to.
That the higher rate on the highest income group was not restored. You also all made compelling arguments against increasing property taxes as a fix for the budget. So would all of you commit at this point, when you reconsider the budget, to reinstate that income tax rate on the highest income earners? You made a very good point of how unequitable the bill that was defeated was.
Roxy, I don't know what we'll see yet, and I don't commit speculatively to bills. I've not seen any tax bill that puts it back at 6.45, I think, which is where it was pre-2012. I'm not sure that it needs to be in terms of a meeting enough revenue to meet the budget demand, so I can't make that commitment today that I would support X rate on any of the brackets. My concern was predominantly for the middle class bracket that went from 4.6 to 5.25. And then the upper bracket was placed just 0.2% higher than that. That bill was scheduled to raise about $590 million in revenue. And if you look at the budget gaps, which are about 280 now for fiscal year 17, and then it goes up to about 500 or so for fiscal year 18, which will start on July 1. You can see that range of revenue is probably enough to meet estimated demands for spending at this point. Placing the higher bracket higher with nothing else in a vacuum doesn't really get us anywhere. It's got to be a balanced package that structurally fixes the problem so that we're not here in 18 and 19 having that discussion. So rather than cherry pick one piece of it and say this is my position on this or that, I think ultimately what we really need is a structural fix, and that's what the Senate President called out for, and that's what we simply haven't seen yet from the governor's office.
Okay, anything to add to that?
Sure. Yes, I'd like to thank everybody this morning and thank our sponsors. I didn't get to do that when I first came in. Taxpayer fairness is my goal, and that's what we need to look at, the tax code. I know I've talked a little bit about the regents. I talked last time about the sales tax for food pantries. There's other issues like the Christmas Tree Association. If the losses go back on, they wouldn't be paying income tax. They would take their losses and they wouldn't pay income tax on their profits. There's items in our tax code that needs to be addressed so that we have fairness for everyone. And one of the things that I've been pushing in the legislature, and there's other senators that are on board with it, lowering sales tax on food. We went to the 6.5 on food. We're one of the highest in the nation. There's 2 other states that are higher than us for sales tax on food in the nation. So one of the proposals that I have, or that we're working on, is to lower it so many tenths of a percent, and then each year we collect 1% greater than what we anticipated. That goes to buy down sales tax on food 0.2% each year. It wouldn't impact the local sales tax on food, it would just impact the state sales tax on food.
Okay, I want to make an announcement here, and then I'll come back to you, Richard. John Cohen had shut me off if I didn't make these announcements. The next legislative coffee is April 1st, April Fool's Day, at 10 o'clock here in the City Hall. April the 3rd, some of you attended the meetings with the funny name charrettes, the community meetings to discuss what might be changed. I'm not sure what all. Anyway, they're going to give the results of those here at City Hall between 5:30 and 7 on April the 3rd. So there are a couple of dates for you. Now, let's see here. You got another question out there?
Yes, I did.
Hello, Richard Dietz. Very brief question on the bond rating. With the addressing the deficits and balancing, or heading towards a balancing budget, will we be, is there strategy specifically relating to getting our bond rating improved again? And what will it take to repair that? Because maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I think we're borrowing money in record amounts, hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and the interest that we have to pay to borrow that alone are numbers that I can barely comprehend. What do we have to do, not just to get back on track, but what do we have to do to get back our good bond rating so that we have some fiscal responsibility?
Blaine, are you feeling financial?
That's been the word of the day. Quite simply, it's like building credit at home. You pay your bills on time, you have the right ratio of debt to assets, and right now Kansas doesn't have that. And it's why, we need to have that serious conversation about taxing and spending in Topeka. And, it's for all the reasons I stated earlier about the veto override. It's why we need to get cracking on doing something before the end of the session, because we continue to see bond rating agencies taking a critical and negative look at Kansas forecast for the future because we haven't got that structural fix. And until we get it, we're going to continue to see concerns and downgrades to Kansas credit rating. Is there a concerted plan amongst the governor's staff or somewhere to raise the bond rating? Not one that I've seen or heard of, but I think that the steps are just like at home. We've got to manage spending, we've got to have enough revenue to pay our bills, and then we have to do that for long enough that credit rating agencies say, yeah, they're structurally sound. And right now, if the trends continue and nothing else changes, the state is not on that path, and the governor's plan that I think both House and Senate will take up next week and likely vote down in a sea of red will not get us there if it were to pass. So we need something else.
I'll throw out a few numbers. The number that I was told for KDOT, we're at $1.7 billion for bonding. For K through 12, $5.8 billion for bonding. We went up $400 million in less than a year on school bonding. And the House passed a budget bill that would borrow more money. The reality is we either borrow out of 2017 budget or we cut. And that's going to be a tough decision for both chambers to make. You can't raise taxes in 2017 to cover the 2017 budget. It's just not there logistically. Even if you make it retro, you wouldn't be paying those taxes until 6 months or a year out. So it's a tough issue before us. I know you guys, most of you have seen the movie Top Gun. There's a quote in there. It says, "Son, your ego's writing checks your body can't cash." Well, we've got that similar situation going on when schools are passing bonding that the state doesn't have any say in. They pass the bond, and there's other entities that are writing checks that the state can't cash. So we need to get our fiscal house in order. That is so critical for the state to get that bonding rating back. And it cost us, you may not understand, some may not know this, but the lower the bonding rating that we have, the higher interest we pay, and the more it costs the state. So, so it is critical that we get that back.
And I'll be real quick. First of all, I really appreciate that question. It's one of the things that I really am passionate about. Being on pensions and benefits, one of the, prior to, one of the questions I asked is, well, how far can the state go in debt? And our Constitution, Kansas Constitution, says we can only go $1 million in debt. That's it. But we have a bonding authority, and they can go as far into debt as they want. And who's on the hook for that? Kansas. So it's a constitutional thing too, where it's a mindset today. If we have a credit card and we know the limit, we spend it, and we just go out there. We say this is what we can afford when we make our payments every month. But if you look, and that's the thing, being on approps and being on I'm looking at what it costs to have those debts. and it's $39 million a month, or, and that's just for one entity. You're going, we pay that much a month? If we would have bought that cash, it would have, so over the lifetime, you're paying how much for the house? You're not paying $80,000, you're paying $160,000 for over 30 years. And so I would love to get there, but there is no concerted effort to move in that direction. And in 2017, there's no way to do it. We are so far, we're looking at 2040 for any answers for some stuff. And so it's
and I'm
spread out.
I'm a KU fan, but KU found and a K-State fan, graduated from both, so I keep it neutral. But KU found a way to go around the legislature and issued a $360 million bond without legislative approval. So, as I said, they're writing checks that the state can't cash at this point. We've got to get this under control. Another thing with our budget, if you read the statutes, we put provisos in that allow the departments and agencies to actually spend over what they've been allocated. I'm not saying any of them have done it recently, but when I was on Ways and Means a year ago, I did see that occur. So we need to be very diligent, again, in this legislation and make sure that we're spending the money where it needs to be. And it's not a matter of want, it's a matter of need at this point.
Okay, well, we're a little over time. I have a bad way of doing that. I've enjoyed visiting with you and with the legislators this morning. The next coffee, if necessary, does anybody want to bet it won't be necessary, is April Fool's Day.
Show up.
So please turn out for that. And I hope you feel like you've gone away with your questions answered. Thanks for the professional staff and for the use of the City Hall. And I think with that, believe me, I've got a gavel up here, but I'm not going to pound it. We are done, and visit and share time out there. And